All right, hey guys, I'm Visa. I'm a friend of Tiago's and Lawrence, and we've met on Twitter. So I basically just want to talk about. So I do use Notion, and I'll show you guys how I use Notion in a bit. But that's not really the main thing I want to talk about. The main thing I want to talk about is actually how I. Well, I don't want to talk too much about Twitter, but it's more about how to use the internet in general and to use other people, friends that you make online, as part of your second brain, as part of like your distributed, thinking system. There's many different ways of framing it, and you framing it as a second brain. I've had some funny conversations with Tiago about this because it's a little bit utilitarian, I think, which is fine. But I also think about how just I think um, we can have a much more social experience online if we produce content and we share it with other people and we reply to other people's content. Anyway, let me just walk you guys through how I use Notion. So this is my pinned tweet, which is like a list of all the threads I do on Twitter. So I'm kind of somewhat known by people as the guy who makes a lot of Twitter threads. And while you can make a thread that's made up of other threads, the user experience for that is not that great. So what I found is that this is like a good place to kind of collate all of my threads. So if you go to my Twitter and you see my pinned tweet, it goes to a Notion page of my threads. So my Notion use is very kind of haphazard and sloppy, and it's not, it's nowhere anything like what Conrad or Lauren do. But it's I basically approach it as like a living document or like a working document, as Tiago put it. And so basically, each of these links are links to my Twitter threads. So if you click on one, it'll bring you to a Twitter thread, and there's like a list of other things. And so it functions as like a master list, or like a index, right? And what's interesting for me is that, so I have this start here section with a list of like 13 threads that I think, new friends who are just getting to know me may be interested in. So I like my threads about taste and about, movies, TV, whatever. And then what's interesting is that as I kept updating this document, so I didn't set out, so now when you look at it, you see all these headers, right? So there's like relationships, making friends, um, doing the internet well, dealing with assholes. I didn't set out to do these things. Rather, what happened was every time I would make a thread that I felt was interesting, I would just copy the link into my Notion document. And initially, all of this was just one big list. So it was just one long list with no header. But then once the list got moderately long, I think once there was about maybe 30 or 40 items in a list, or maybe about 50. Once the list is kind of a little bit too long to see everything at a glance, then what I do is I start inserting headers to subdivide the list. And I wanted to be very careful not to overfit what the headers were going to be, because I have past experience from other note-taking systems and other, like when I used to blog. And when you blog, it's very tempting to try and come up with this very perfect, very elegant set of categories. But if the categories are kind of, if it's almost too perfect, then you try to force fit your content into the categories and it somehow doesn't work. So having experimented for years with this stuff, I really advocate like a kind of bottom up categorization, which is to make the list first of everything, and then you see what lumps together. So what are like the related things that this goes with that, this goes with that, right? You repeatedly do that, and then you kind of cluster the things together, and then what? And I find it super useful to think about how you naturally talk about those things. So again, instead of like trying to come up with a very fancy or a very polished sounding description of something, literally just because again, because all of these are my Twitter threads, right? And so like on Twitter, I'm posting stuff that I'm sharing with my friends, and so everything that I'm talking about. So even earlier, I was talking about being here and meeting Tiago, and like so everything that I post is starts out on Twitter as interactions with other people. And so there's this very conversational style to it. So like all my threads are basically me talking to my friends, and then it becomes like an aggregate of conversations that I've had with my friends. And so I over time, so I have like book threads where I talk about, where I literally just take a book. So I've let me show you one of my book threads, for example. What's a good one? Ogilvy's Confessions. This is one of my favorite books. And so I literally take pictures of the book while I'm reading it. I underline stuff, and I Twitter is breaking its threads a little bit right now, which is very frustrating. But you can. So this is my note taking system, right? So I don't use something that's entirely. And I know it's a little unorthodox. Like not everybody does this, but basically instead of having like a book notes thread in my Notion or in my Apple Notes. I mean, I do have copies of those things. I actually use Twitter as a note taking system. And the cool thing is then people can reply to individual tweets. And then, I get to see what other people think. Sometimes they recommend other things to me. And so then when I'm done with that, this goes in my book thread. And then this goes in my list of book threads on my Notion page. So it's like this tree structure, like this web. And yeah, so I guess what I'm really trying to do here is I'm just sharing with you guys how I approach kind of cataloging my thoughts and my conversations on Twitter, and then how I catalog those things on my Notion. And so while you can look at the Notion page and see it as an index of some kind, what's really interesting, I think, to me is my motivation for doing this and how I feel compelled to keep doing this. Because I don't think I would have been able to do this if I was just, oh, it would be nice to have a catalog of my thoughts. Like that almost feels a bit, I don't know, self-indulgent or pointless or whatever. But the reason this exists and the reason it persists and I keep adding to it and growing it and building on it is because of its conversational nature. Because each thread in the list is something that is basically a conversation that I've had with a friend. And like once I've had a conversation with one friend and they seem to have a good time, I find myself asking, can I, share the notes from that with another friend, right? So this is really, while it's a list of threads or a list of notes, it's also a list of correspondences, and it's a list of ways in which I interact with other people in the world. And this is how I met Tiago even, right? So Tiago's in Singapore right now, and which is like my home city. And the reason we met was because we were having conversations about these things on Twitter. And I probably have like some threads about productivity somewhere in here if you want to go and look it up. But like I think it's really the embodiment that, do you get what I'm trying to say? It's kind of a it's I, because I remember when I started out, I used to try and find a way to solve kind of my issues with, maybe I need to learn getting things done, or maybe I need to learn a checklist manifesto, like some kind of thing that would get me to be more efficient, effective, blah blah blah. And those things were useful for me, but kind of the message that I bring right, is that I think that I became much more productive when I framed it as how I can relate to other people and how I can build relationships with other people. And so, it's like all of these things are ways of relating, ways of making friends. And like I've made a ton of friends on Twitter, and like every day I look forward to logging into Twitter and posting about whatever it is that's on my mind. And I can always search for my past threads, and then I can look up whatever threads are relevant to whatever I'm talking about. And so even now, if you guys want, you can go to this post, you can look up any thread that you think is relevant, you can reply to any of those tweets, and I will reply back, right? And we can become friends. And that just that process, I feel, is it's like my brain is interlaced with many other people's brains. And it's super cool that we can use technology like Notion and Twitter to connect with other people. And I feel like that's the real game. Like that's the real point of everything. Yeah. Yes, that's my message. Hope you guys found that useful.